everyone to the weekly meeting, the Rotary Club of Jonesboro, four-time reigning club of the year. Now for our program, I'm going to let Norm, the masked bandit, introduce our program.
I just wanted to help you sell those masks, Gary. I've served on the state board of Interfaith Arkansas for several terms. Fortunately, they didn't notice and they let me stay. But one of the greatest pleasures of being on that board is working with truly wonderful people. There's a selfless group intent on bringing people together and serving the greater community. Scharmel Roussel typifies the spirit and dedication I have seen. She is the power behind Arkansas Power and Light, the environmental arm of the organization. She's tireless in her efforts to serve Arkansasians, and we're in for a treat in having her speak to us today. I think you'll see the kind of person she is and the enthusiasm she has. Scharmel, welcome.
Well, thank you all so much, and thank you for inviting me to be here today, especially thanks to Norm. So today we're going to talk about environmental justice, and we're going to talk about the people and the planet. So as Norm said, Arkansas Interfaith Power and Light is a nonprofit organization, and it is the mission and service team of Interfaith Arkansas. So Interfaith Arkansas is made up of people who represent diverse faith traditions, and we like to focus on the ways that we are more alike than we are different. So some of the things that we focus on are economic justice, health equity, immigration, human trafficking, peace and reconciliation, restorative justice, and environmental justice. So Norm and I have served on that board for several years and worked on lots of projects together. So today we're going to talk about the environmental justice part. So what is environmental justice? We think that climate justice is the fair treatment of all people. It is the freedom from discrimination in the development of policies and projects that address climate change. So we're going to quickly look at damaging trends to creation and then some of the solutions to them. And you may be familiar with a lot of this information. I'm not sure how much you keep up with environmental issues. The very last slide has links to the sources of information for this presentation. But you can see that our organization includes Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and people of all faith traditions. We believe that the sacred writings of all of these faith traditions ask us to care for creation, protect the planet, and preserve fragile ecosystems that sustain life. So here's my contact information, and this is a little bit about what we do. We offer presentations like this to community groups and to college groups. We support community gardens and backyard gardens, energy efficiency projects, solar installations at houses of worship, and now something new for us is electric vehicle charging stations at houses of worship. So why are we interested in these things? It's because of what's at stake. Food, water, air, shelter, energy, the basics of life. Our faith perspective asks us to work with compassion toward a more equitable world. So we can't continue to deplete water, soil, and resources because we love our neighbors. We can't continue to contaminate the air that they breathe and the water that they drink, especially low-income people of color who are more likely to be impacted by pandemics, drought, dirty water, dirty air, and plus their utility bills take up a more disproportionate amount of their income because they often live in rental houses that are not well insulated. So those are some of the things that we work on. And I like to think of the Good Samaritan story, which I think everybody's familiar with. You'll remember in the Good Samaritan story, a man was bleeding by the side of the road. He had been beaten. Clearly, there's a problem that needs someone's attention. And three people come along. And the first one, I believe, was a rabbi, or at least it was a religious leader in the community, who was busy and didn't do anything about the problem that he saw. And the second person to come by was a Levite, who would have been a person of high esteem in the community, a person of good standing, who also didn't do anything about the problem that he saw. And maybe he crossed the street and averted his eyes and hoped that someone else would take care of the problem. The third person to come along was the Samaritan, who would have been a person with low status in the community and very few resources. But it was the Samaritan who recognized the problem and stopped to do something and took action, using his own time and his own resources to do something about a problem. So we like to think about our efforts in environmental justice as playing the role of Good Samaritan. So I'll tell you a little bit about how I got involved in this work. In 2008, my family took a trip to Alaska, and on one of the days of that trip, we took an inland journey to go whale watching, and we got on a bus. And the bus driver also served as sort of a tour guide and made commentary along the way. And at one point, he pointed out where an airport was located in a city that we were going through. And then about 30 minutes later, he asked us to look far ahead in the distance where we could see the beginning edge of a glacier. And then he said that that glacier used to begin back at the airport. So I started thinking about how long ago that was and how many miles ago that was, and how people traveling to Alaska by jet and by cruise ship were contributing to the problem that was causing receding glaciers. That night, I asked my family members around the dinner table what they thought about the bus driver's comments, and they did not remember the bus driver even saying that. And that reminded me that we all live in our own little silos. So if an issue is on our radar, we are more likely to hear information related to that issue. And if that issue is not on our radar, then we practice like filtered listening, selective listening. So we may not ever even hear that information. It was not long after that that I went to visit some relatives in Hawaii, and I have a cousin who is a retired NASA scientist, but at that time he wasn't retired yet. And he spent almost all of his career at the top of a volcano where there's a NASA observatory, and he did atmospheric readings almost his entire career. And he took me up there one night. He went about 3 nights a week for many, many years. And he took me up there one night, and while he was doing his atmospheric readings, I walked around the observatory and saw a lot of the charts and things that were on the wall that indicated what it is that's happening to our planet. His name is Dr. Stuart McDermott, and he has given lectures all over the world on atmospheric readings and what is happening in our atmosphere. So one of the reasons that I got really interested in is because I know that my cousin Stuart has no reason to lie to me about this. You know, it really just, the information really hit home for me. And it was not long after that that a few of us started Arkansas Interfaith Power and Light. So I'm going to hit this arrow so that you can see some of the causes of greenhouse gases that are going into our atmosphere, the fragile atmosphere that sustains life. And the reason that we care about this is because we are losing habitats and losing species at a rapid rate. So let me hit this arrow. You can see scientists have been warning us for decades about the consequences of ignoring what happens when gases are trapped. So the sun's rays enter the Earth's atmosphere. They warm the Earth to a livable temperature. Some of the rays go back out into the atmosphere. But as we pump more and more gases into the atmosphere, and that thin, fragile layer becomes thicker, then the gases get trapped, and it's heating up the Earth beyond a livable temperature. It's like being in a hot car on a hot summer day when the windows are rolled up and you want to roll the windows down to let some of that hot air escape, but you can't. The windows won't roll down and the heat is trapped. So let me hit this arrow and we can see how global warming is associated with the burning of fossil fuels. Scientists have been tracking that since 1850. So we are pumping a lot of man-made pollution into this thin layer of our atmosphere. It's being filled up with toxic gases. So here we can see how temperatures have been increasing outside of the norm since the 1880s, and that's when they started keeping track of that information. The oceans also have been warming up. So for many years, the oceans absorbed excess carbon emissions, and they're about tapped out. They can't take much more. So the oceans are warming, and also the air over the oceans is also warming. And we can see how this contributes to weather catastrophes. These catastrophic weather events are on the increase around the world, and we can see impacts also here in the USA. So it's very frequent now that we see several threatening hurricanes headed toward the Gulf of Mexico, sometimes all at the same time. It's not just superstorms, it's also drought that can be a consequence. So I don't know if you remember this or not, but this past summer, one day in Death Valley, California, it was 130 degrees, which set a world record. So it's not just in other places around the world, it's also here in the United States. One of the consequences of drought is that it affects crops. That impacts food insecurity, which leads to immigration complexities and global conflicts. And an example is Syria. So about a decade ago, Syrian farmers started experiencing extreme drought, and middle-class people just like us lost their family farms. They were forced to move to crowded cities. They often lived in tent communities with profound poverty. And to survive, gangs emerged, and many of those gangs led to the terrorist organizations that are part of our world today. But it's not just in Syria. Also now, we have climate refugees in California, and we're also seeing wildfires in Colorado. And we see the consequences here in Arkansas too. So we know that on August 27th of this past summer, Arkansas was hit with 7 tornadoes and other extreme weather related to one hurricane, Hurricane Laura. And it was the first time that a tropical storm a tropical storm warning had been issued in the state of Arkansas. We usually think of tropical storms as something that happens on coastlines, but this was an inland tropical storm. So there's some more information from the EPA and the Corps of Engineers. Heat and floods are Arkansas problems. Hot summers are likely to reduce yields of corn and rice. The recurring flooding of the White River is a worsening problem here in Arkansas. Audubon, Arkansas tells us that there are 389 bird species in peril in the USA, and 12 of those are right here in Arkansas because of climate conditions. We know that we all depend on pollinators for 1/3 of the food that we eat. For example, if we didn't have tomatoes, we wouldn't have any ketchup for our hamburgers and our French fries. And we need to be aware that pesticides that kill pests in our yards and also weeds, they can also kill the pollinators. So we need to be careful about how we use those pesticides. We need to plant milkweed and other things that attract bees and butterflies and birds. And we need to leave the dandelions on our yard because that's bee food. So extreme drought is an a problem that impacts soil health. And again, the loss of family farms leads to profound poverty here in Arkansas, around the nation, and around the world. So we can see this as a humanitarian crisis. And so the U.S. military has been predicting these pandemics related to climate change around the world. That's what we're seeing today. Go down here. We can see how heat is related to wildfire. So we've seen a lot on the West Coast and also in Colorado in recent months, and dry lightning has become a factor. So like a record 7 million acres burned this year on the, not just in California, but the whole West Coast. So this is a slide about pandemic diseases and how they're on the move. And you can see that as these pandemics are exacerbated by global warming and impacting more and more of the earth. So this graphic was actually created before the current pandemic. But as animals lose their habitats, we share space with them. We live closer to their homes. So animal diseases are jumping species and people are infected. And we call these zoonotic viruses, which are well documented by scientists. The transmission can be through animal slaughter, bites, or through a mosquito or a tick. And there's an increasing risk with these pandemics today. And so the massive demands of our growing population are leading to more and more dangerous interactions with animals through mass slaughter, deforestation, urbanization, and climate change. So if we do nothing, there are consequences to doing nothing. And here are what some of those consequences are. But not all is gloom and doom. We do have some solutions, and we know that enough solar energy reaches the earth every hour to fulfill all of our energy needs for a full year. The challenge has been storing that solar energy. That's an obstacle that scientists and engineers have been working on. If I hit this arrow here, we can see how solar panel installations have increased in recent years. They're becoming more and more popular all the time. And if I hit this arrow, we can see how we have actually exceeded projections for solar energy in recent years. We also have increased the projections for storage capacity. So engineers and scientists have been working on increasing storage capacity, and that means that renewable energy would be available at night and on rainy days and not just on sunny days. So we can see that the cost of solar panels are going down as they go up in efficiency and popularity. They're going down in cost, and so that makes them more practical. And Arkansas has a great solar potential. They rate states like from 1 to 5 on solar potential, and Arizona would be a 5, but Arkansas is a 4. We have a lot of solar potential in Arkansas. And here are some of the current installations that I know about. There may be others, but this is just a list that I came up with, and it's a growing list that gets longer all of the time. Small installations and also huge installations. And part of this is a result of the Solar Access Act of 2019, which solar exploded in Arkansas right after that. And some of the supporters of that act were Walmart plus 60 other large businesses, small businesses, municipalities, and nonprofit organizations in Arkansas. Not everything about the 2019 legislative session was wonderful. Now hybrid car owners pay $100 more annually for their car tags. EV owners pay $200 more. That's part of the governor's highway bill. But we already have an effort underway to roll that back or reduce those penalty charges. And we've already identified legislators who are willing to introduce that bill. Also in the next session of the legislature, you may see some efforts to establish a net zero task force that will study the most effective and quickest way to get to net zero power. You'll see a container deposit law, also known as a bottle bill. That's where you return your bottles and get pennies for the bottles that you return. You may remember that from the good old days. And you'll also see an effort to amend the outdoor lighting shielding law, which has to do with reducing light pollution, which impacts animal habitats. So Arkansas IPL offers incentive money for houses of worship that want to install solar panels. And so these are some of the congregations that we have helped over the past 5 or 6 years. Now, wind energy is not that practical in Arkansas, but it is part of the renewable energy solution. So we can see how wind energy has risen dramatically in recent years. And overall, wind and solar are renewable energy, are green energy, and we can see how renewable energy has greatly exceeded expectations that were set decades ago. So a new effort for us has to do with EV charging stations. Arkansas Interfaith Power and Light is working with the Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality to install EV charging stations at houses of worship around the state. And engineers, I'm on several webinars about EV charging stations, but engineers are working on an infrastructure for EV charging stations that will go from the East Coast to the West Coast and from Mexico to Canada. And very soon, a significant portion of our trucking industry will be EV vehicles. And you can see here some of the auto manufacturers who are moving toward electric vehicles. So people around the world are concerned about climate change, and there have been marches in recent years in Arkansas, in the United States, and around the world. Not so much lately because of the pandemic, but people are concerned about this issue. But you don't have to march or put solar panels on your roof to demonstrate that you care about this issue. You can do other smaller personal actions like participate in a community garden, or install a backyard garden, or switch to a more local plant-based diets. We can see from this graphic here in the lower right that if you look at all of the greenhouse gas emissions around the world, the transportation sector makes up 13% of those toxic emissions, but the animal agricultural industry makes up 51%. And that is because of the industrialized agriculture system and methane emissions that are associated with the meat production industry. So something as simple as just eating less meat can have a positive impact on the planet. Energy efficiency is also part of the solution. So we put together gift bags and give them away. And sometimes scout troops and vacation Bible school classes and college classes decorate the bags, fill the bags as a service project. And then these bags are distributed through food pantries and other community centers. And so it helps people, it helps our low-income neighbors reduce their energy consumption and lower their utility bill. And in the process, they also reduce their carbon footprint. Another simple thing to do is just plant a tree or plant several trees. We know that trees are natural carbon sinks. They absorb carbon dioxide and they give us oxygen. Personal choices that we make can have an impact on the planet. We know that plastic bottles can be recycled, but the truth is the majority of them are not, and they end up in our waterways where they harm wildlife and their habitats. So just simple things like choosing a reusable water bottle can have a positive impact on the planet. So those are some of the things that we do at Arkansas Interfaith Power and Light. And that's how you can get in touch with me about those efforts, where we do presentations, we support community gardens, backyard gardens, energy efficiency, solar installations, and we're moving toward EV charging stations at houses of worship. Arkansas IPL is a climate justice grantee. So some of these slides were provided by the Climate Reality Project. Here are some of the sources of the information that I used for this presentation, and I can share these with you at any future time that you might want to look into some of these issues more thoroughly. I've included one that has to do with the Syrian refugee issue. Drawdown.org is an excellent source for looking at the 100 top things that we can do to have a positive impact on the planet right now. So that's what we're concerned with, is environmental justice. And why are we concerned with it? It is because low-income people of color are most impacted by pandemics, drought, dirty water, dirty air, and they also spend a disproportionate amount of their income on their utility bills. So that's why at Interfaith Arkansas, we are concerned with environmental justice. So thank you very much for letting me share this information with you. And I think now maybe we'll have some time for Q&A. Yeah, okay.
All right. Any questions for Scharmel? That's all very interesting information, Scharmel. I appreciate you sharing that with us.
You're welcome.
Yeah, I was struck at how many of those topics go along with my area of expertise at the Craighead Electric Cooperative, because we work with making like houses energy efficient through our weatherization program. So if you ever have anyone, especially who's on Craighead Electric, who has questions about their energy efficiency of their house or solar panels or electric vehicles, please have them give me a call.
I will. And you're John
John
Carmack.
Carmack. Yes, ma'am. The Craighead Electric Cooperative.
Scharmel, I noticed that the installation of solar panels is almost all in the Little Rock area. Is that right?
So far.
Okay. So
one though is in Fayetteville. The largest one we've ever participated in is in Fayetteville. It's the Good Shepherd Lutheran Church.
how does one, just as an illustration, say there was a place in Jonesboro that wanted to do that? What do they do? How do they go about doing this?
Well, I guess the first thing, if you want some incentive money from Arkansas Interfaith Power and Light, you would contact us and let us know that you're interested in a solar installation. Then we would have someone who is experienced with this Google the address and see if you have a good south-facing roof that doesn't have obstruction, or another place on the property that would be a good location for solar installation. Then we would want to see your utility bills for at least the last year, so we could see how much energy are you consuming, what is the square footage of your building, that kind of thing, so that then we could make a recommendation on this is how many solar panels you would need to provide this percentage of your electricity usage, and this is how much money we're going to give you, and you raise the rest. So the way that we are able to do this is in recent years, we have been able to get a matching grant from IPL at the national level. And that grant always includes a request for incentive money for solar installations. It doesn't have anything to do with, right now we're operating under 3 grants: Climate Reality, a USDA grant, which is about community gardens, and an EPA grant, which is about energy efficiency and community gardens.
I hate to jump in, but I actually, it's kind of funny, Scharmel, because I know you and I don't have the answers to these questions either. But I own a hybrid and I pay $100 extra. And my daughter in Colorado has an electric vehicle, and she I think actually gets a benefit from doing that, other than that she's helping the environment. We had a speaker for Rotary who somewhat justified this tax, but how are you planning on reversing this to encourage Arkansans, or Arkansawers, the more correct term, to be more energy efficient in what they drive?
So there were several of us who spoke up at the last legislative session in the Energy Committee to try to stop this. What we see are punitive charges on people who choose to drive electric vehicles or hybrids. There are some states who offer incentives because it's good for the environment and actually better for the roads, because they're usually lighter vehicles and then they don't cause so much abuse on the roads. But the thinking of the Energy Committee was, those of us who drive these vehicles, we're not buying nearly enough gas, so we're not paying enough in gas tax, and so we need to make up for it through these penalties. So I think in the next session of the legislature, our plan is we don't think we'll be successful at completely rolling it back, but we think that there is a better formula. If we're going to pay more, there's a better formula than just flat fees like they pulled out of thin air, $100 for hybrids and $200 extra for EV vehicles. States do have, there are other states that have charges, but they've come up with a system to calculate what realistically we should be paying. So that's what we're going to work toward. But when we charge people extra for those things, it does deter people from buying hybrids and electric vehicles. Not too much though. I mean, they're buying them at a pretty good clip. So it's just something that we're going to work on because we think it's unfair, and we think that there can be a better plan. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, very much so.
So this is Beverly. I have a question also about the solar installation on homes and other places. So do you have to be living in a certain area, or do you have to have your electricity through a certain provider? How does that work?
Okay, so most everywhere in the state of Arkansas, your utility provider is required to provide you with a net metering contract if you decide that you want to install solar. So at the houses of worship where we've installed solar, we were able to enter into a net metering contract with Entergy or a solar cooperative or whoever is providing the electricity. Now, I'll use my own home as an example so that it'll help make this clear. And this is the second home that I've owned with solar panels. So, and I'm in Conway. So my electricity provider is Conway Corp. So an installer came and put the solar panels on the house, and then I entered into an agreement with Conway Corp so that I'm connected to the grid, but I power my own house first, and then whatever extra is left over, if there is any extra left over, goes to the grid for other people to use. Now on hot summer days, I won't send any extra to the grid because I'm running my air conditioner just like you all are. And so I'm consuming more than I produce. But the rest of the year, I'm producing more than I consume. So I get credits on my utility bill. In Arkansas, you do not get paid for the energy that you produce. You get credits on your utility bill. But if you are interested in a solar installation, one of the first steps that you would need to take is to make sure that your utility provider, where you live or where your house of worship is, will accommodate a net metering contract. To what extent they're required to do so, I'm not sure. I know it's an issue that the Public Service Commission has taken up. It may be that everybody's required to, but I'm not sure about that. It looks like John has some information about that in Craighead County. So yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Scharmel, do you have any idea how many charging stations are out there for vehicles? I know a couple people posted, look like there might be some in town, and then I know Dana went on a road trip and would see them. I've seen some in Memphis. The only reason I ask is I've got somebody that has a Tesla that they actually had to go to a ball game, and they drove it to, is like in Maynard, and they just about did not make it home.
So I'll tell you who has that list is the Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality. They have a list of where there are EV charging stations around the state. And I'll tell you why we're getting interested in this is because ADEQ got a grant settlement from Volkswagen, because Volkswagen didn't tell the truth about everything. And so they had to pay a penalty. So now Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality has all this money that they chose to spend it on expanding EV charging stations around the state so that Arkansas won't miss out on this, infrastructure change that's about to happen. I only know of one at a house of worship in Arkansas, and it is at Second Presbyterian Church in Little Rock. Now, I know that there are some at like UALR, there are some at University of Central Arkansas, there are some at Hendrix College, there are some at hotels and motels. I don't have that list, but the Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality does. Now, if a church wants an EV charging station, then they have to be willing for anybody traveling through Arkansas to stop and use it. It can't just be for your church members. You know, you have to have it in a place where it's accessible to people who are traveling through Arkansas. And the closer it is to the interstate, the better. So at some point in the near future, we're all going to have access to all of this information about where EV charging stations are, because the trucking industry particularly needs it, and so do motorists who are traveling through states. So how much does installation cost? Are we talking about solar installation or EV charging installation? We're talking about EV. Solar. Okay. So, all right. So solar panels, let's say that you were going to install 20 solar panels on your house. It's going to cost about $18,000. So it's going to be about $900 per solar panel. Now, solar panels over the years have gone up in efficiency. So I can tell you that at my previous house, I had solar panels for 11 years and I had 20 of them. But then 11 years later, when I moved to Conway and put solar panels on this house, I can tell by looking at the energy that's produced that they're much more efficient than the ones that I installed now it'd be 12 years ago. So, but you can kind of figure on about $900 per panel, and that includes the installation.
What about a charging station? If, for example, a church, synagogue, or mosque in this case, wanted to have a charging station, how do you work with that, Scharmel?
Okay, we're just now getting into that, and I will tell you that the applications at ADEQ are not ready yet. They're still being negotiated, I guess. So I already have a list of like 14 houses of worship in Arkansas that are interested, but I can't fill out the application yet. So when the application is ready, I'll know a whole lot more about the process. But I've been attending webinars so that I'll know that it's not just as simple as installing an EV charging station. You've got to take into consideration conduit, how far the electricity is going to come from the electric box, and there are a whole lot of things to be taken into consideration. So I don't know yet how much ADEQ is going to pay for and how much the house of worship is going to have to pay for. I'm hoping that it will cost the house of worship nothing, except for maybe they'll see an increase on their utility bill. But it's possible that I might can get that cost written into the grant also, but I don't know that yet because the application isn't even ready yet. I know that when Second Presbyterian Church installed 2 EV charging stations that were connected to the solar installation, I think they cost about $2,000 each, I think is what the cost was for those. But they're not the high-speed kind. Like, that's been a couple of years ago, so I think we're starting to look at a whole different piece of equipment. We need high-speed charging stations that really charge fast for these people who are traveling through Arkansas, and they need to be universal, so that not only will they power up a Tesla, they'll power up a Chevy Volt or whatever it is that you have. So there are different kind of plug-in things, and all those factors have to be taken into consideration. And we're just at the beginning of this.
Scharmel, we're waiting for those ADEQ permits to come through too. Last I heard, it was going to be like the end of December before those are done. But we would like to install, we're looking into a high-speed charger somewhere in Northeast Arkansas and somewhere.
Good.
For that exact reason.
Well, think about a house of worship.
That would be
think about partnering with a house of worship that's located near the interstate.
Mm-hmm.
So this is probably a dumb question, but I don't have an electric car, so I'm trying to figure. So if you have a charging station, just say it's your church, and I pull up to charge my car, am I paying anything to reimburse for that use of that electricity, or?
Probably. Now let me say this. The ones at Second Presbyterian Church in Little Rock is totally free. Anybody can pull up there and charge their car. But I think that in the newer charging stations that are coming out, you actually insert a debit card or a credit card, and so you pay for the power that you draw off of the charging station. That's something else that I don't have all the details on yet, but I don't know, John, if you've been attending those webinars that ADEQ is sponsored, but it looks like that's part of the equation. We need to have the ones, and I'm sure churches would want that have the capability of people putting in their debit card or credit card.
Yeah, it's up to the charging infrastructure owner as to whether or not they want to charge to plug in.
Right.
Do either of you know about how much you would pay? I mean, just how much electricity do you have to pay for to charge a Volt or a Tesla?
Scharmel, do you want to?
No, I don't know, because I don't own an electric vehicle. I know some people who do, who have solar panels and they charge their cars at night, but I've never experienced that.
Yeah, I do. I have an electric vehicle. If you're charging it at home at night, it's pennies per mile. If you're charging at one of those high-speed public fast chargers, the price is comparable to gas. But you're not charging at those every day. You're charging at home every day and using the public fast chargers just to travel. So even if it's a bit more expensive, you're not using them very often. That's not your primary way of charging your vehicle.
That's a good point.
I was going to say, I don't see any more questions in the chat. Any more questions before we move on? Like I said, that is all very good information, Scharmel. We appreciate you coming and sharing that with us. That's good.
Very
I'd like to make a comment.
Yeah.
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
One of the interesting things about the EV and the sort of connectivity amongst people that the Rotary Club is interested in, I think, is that if there were a lot of EV vehicles in garages charging at night, that's a part of the solution for battery storage. So it allows energy to be saved and conserved to be used later. And, you know, I think that's a really interesting aspect of how all of these solutions are not just one big one, but many working together.
Point.
Good point. Okay.
Can I charge my flip phone?
But,
I don't know about that, Al.
I'm putting our website in the chat. Our website is under reconstruction. There's a team of students at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock that's redoing our website, but it's up there now. So anyway, that's our website.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I just wanted to throw in one other thing, that the help of community gardens works well too, because one of the goals of Arkansas Interfaith is bringing people together, different kinds, and it does not discriminate anybody who wants to work in the garden, for example. And so I think this work is very helpful and beneficial, and we need something like Arkansas Interfaith to bring us together. And it's people like Scharmel who does all the work behind this, the arm of the environmental arm, but it extends into other areas, as she had said, and helps to alleviate poverty as well.
It also builds community. So what we have experienced over the past 5 or 6 years is, you know, neighbors get together, they plant seeds together, they tend to the garden together, they harvest the crops together, maybe they'll have a meal together, and it really builds community. So people are working side by side. And when people do that, they get to know one another. Maybe they didn't previously know each other. So all of our gardens are open. They're not fenced off. So anybody can come in and work in the garden, and people do come in sometimes and take things that they didn't grow. And that's okay with us. If they take watermelons or sweet potatoes or anything that they didn't grow, we don't like it. We don't like vandalism, but we are there, you know, to serve the community so that people have access to local fresh food. So over the years, we have developed a network of growers. It's more than 100 people who are interested in urban agriculture, and they share what they grow. And then as they learn urban agriculture methods, they teach each other. So it's really developed into a pretty good model for urban agriculture.